Good evening, everybody. We'll get started with your review session. I'm not sure. It looks like my feed is kind of messy right there. So hopefully the wireless starts picking up and doing better with the feed without all the messiness going along with it. We've got a few questions for tonight, not a lot, and so we'll be able to cover the review session really quickly. Remember, you can also take a look at that finishing of the lecture that I've got posted for you guys. To be able to fill in the rest of what's going on with Jimmy Carter's presidency. So if that's confusing, you'll be able to get help from there as well. Your test tomorrow is 25 questions, and so please come prepared to be able to do that. But I'll dive into the questions you guys have and we'll be able to wrap up quickly. First question that was posted was asking about Kent State University and the Philadelphia Plan. And so those two things are both during the Nixon presidency. The Kent State situation is where you saw at both Kent State and Jackson State University protests with students who were mad about the idea of America moving into Cambodia to open up attacks there to try to attack movement along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. That then resulted in a counterattack where we had, the protesters were then attacked by law enforcement in the case of Jackson State and National Guardsmen in the case of Kent State. And it became a flashpoint between hawks and doves where we had the two sides that were not just angry at each other, but also a flaring of violence that was taking place that brought a new tension to the Vietnam War. Your Philadelphia Plan was Richard Nixon's plan to work on creating quota systems inside businesses so that if a business wanted to do business with the United States as a contractor to build stuff for the United States, they would need to meet certain quotas and certain guidelines to try to achieve equity and a desegregation of their workforce if they wanted to complete contracts for the United States government. So it's showing you that Richard Nixon, while wanting to slow down the pace of civil rights activism inside the United States government, isn't moving away from it. He is just somebody who's trying to slow down the pace, but he is also advocating in his own way attempts to try to equalize things inside the workplace. Your next question that you have is explaining the War Powers Act and the New Right. The War Powers Act was the law that was created during Richard Nixon's presidency in 1973 that put limitations on what the president can do militarily before he seeks congressional approval. And we discussed in class how this law has been in effect, but we've also seen it violated many times since this time period. But what it's supposed to do is it's supposed to require the president to go to Congress. If they decide to initiate a military operation, they need to go seek permission from the Congress to be able to continue that and to explain what they're up to. But like I said, they've avoided doing that so far. The New Right is also a term that was used in your textbook was neoconservatives. And these new conservatives are people who are turned off by Dwight D. Eisenhower. They're turned off by Richard Nixon. And they feel like those type of Republicans are a little bit too moderate, and they'd like to see a much more conservative type of president instead of those presidents. Neoconservatives are also a little nervous about détente because they feel like détente is a little bit too soft with the rest of the world, and they'd like a more aggressive foreign policy instead. And so when we take a look at the New Right, their person that's going to be the person entering the presidency in 1980, Ronald Reagan, he'll be a great example of what the New Right is looking for from their presidents instead of like a Gerald Ford, a Richard Nixon, or a Dwight D. Eisenhower. Next question is about stagflation, inflation, and deflation. So the best way to describe these things, first of all, inflation is a change in prices in the economy where the prices are going up because of a number of different factors. For one reason or another, you'll have more money floating around in the economy, and because there's more dollar bills floating around, it can force prices to go up. You can also have the price of certain essential products go up, and that can then drive up the price of everything else. In the case of the 1970s, we see that happening with inflation from government spending and also oil prices that are going up. And so all those things are making the prices rise. Deflation, on the other hand, is where the economy is seeing prices drop. And it can be happening for a number of different factors. Like in the late 1800s, when we got rid of greenbacks and we went with only the gold standard, that created a deflationary cycle where there was less money floating around. And then the number of dollar bills floating around meant that prices would then drop as well. What you're asking about with stagflation, though, is stagflation is the experience that we had in the 70s, where prices went up, but then the economy went stagnant. It wasn't growing very much, and so the combination of those two things made it really difficult, because according to Keynesian economics, the way you fix that is by doing more government spending and creating stimulus to fix an economy. But if you do that, that will also create rapid inflation that will make things really bad. And so the problem we had in the 1970s is our old techniques that would normally help out with an economic crash are having struggles. The next question is about the Iran hostage crisis. For this question, the lecture that I had up online this afternoon is going to be really good for you. During the 1979 time period, we're going to have the leader of Iran, the Shah, who we put into place when we helped to topple Mossadegh in the 1950s. He's going to develop cancer. And when he develops cancer, he tries to go to the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota to seek treatment. And when he does, he will be overthrown by a man who's known as the Ayatollah Khomeini, who was a religious leader who had been exiled, and he came back to Iran and led a revolution. With this revolution, he put into place a fundamentalist Muslim government, and this government is going to be very anti-American for what America has been doing by propping up the dictatorship of the Shah. And then also they're very frustrated by the use of American power to take Iranian oil. And then there's also just an anti-colonialism and nationalism that's going on with them as well. They're going to capture the U.S. embassy around the same time period, and they're going to take everybody inside of their hostage. And during the Carter presidency, that hostage crisis is one that Jimmy Carter will try to fix a number of different ways, including an invasion of Iran to sneak them out using special forces. And each of those attempts are going to fail until Ronald Reagan becomes president. And this is a highly embarrassing thing for Jimmy Carter in the United States, because we're being held hostage as a country by a country that we don't see as our equal. And the fact that they're able to take our hostages, hold them as long as they want to, and we're not able to respond is really aggravating to a lot of people, especially our neoconservatives who see a better option in Ronald Reagan when they vote for him in 1980. The next term, white flight, is a term that is used to describe the movement of many middle to upper income families from the inner cities to the suburbs when they have the opportunity, for the purpose of escaping neighborhoods that are becoming more diverse, with African Americans who are moving into the neighborhoods, especially during the great migrations of World War I and World War II. This is also being accompanied during the 1940s and the 1950s with things like housing discrimination, redlining, sundown towns, and so on, which is keeping minority people out of those neighborhoods while creating segregated neighborhoods out in the suburbs compared to the inner city. The next question is asking about affirmative action. Affirmative action is a movement that's happening during the Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon time period, with the idea of not just getting rid of de jure segregation, but instead also putting into place practices or laws that are requiring consideration of race as a positive for people who are in minority groups that have been discriminated against when they're being considered for admission into schools or other sorts of positions. With affirmative action, this will be the case in colleges and universities, where they'll be considering students, and if students have similar backgrounds, or even if a minority student has a slightly weaker academic standing, they might get a position in the school strictly to reconcile discriminations that had happened in the past. In combination with that, though, remember the court case Bakke versus United States of California, where a white man tried to apply to college to get into a medical program, was denied, and the Supreme Court in the 1970s determined that was unfair. And so we're going to see that affirmative action midway through the 1970s is going to be coming under attack, and it's going to be criticized for the idea of first discrimination against white people who were not in their own ways segregationist, but obviously are living in a society that had been practiced that for a long time. So you'll find from the 1970s on, this is a battle that's still in existence. So we still have elements of affirmative action, but we also find that it's much diminished compared to what we had back then. Next question is asking about the Miranda warning. This is a court case, Miranda versus Arizona, that leads to this decision. And the Miranda warning is just the result of that court case, where a man named Miranda was arrested But the trial, the interrogation that took place with him was done without him being aware of the rights that he had, and also it was done in a way where the police knew what rights he had, but weren't actually making him aware of what rights he should be taking advantage of in order to protect his ability to be innocent until proven guilty. With the court case, they're going to determine that the police have a duty to provide a person who is suspected of a crime with their Miranda warnings in order to ensure that they are aware of their rights when they are subject to an arrest. And so that's what you see in virtually every police procedural TV show, is them reading the rights to a suspect so that they are aware of what's going on when interrogation is taking place. The next question is, can I explain the events in, let me see here, in Chile with Allende and Pinochet? What happens with that moment is during the Nixon presidency, we're going to have Salvador Allende, who is going to get elected president in Chile. He is going to be creating a government that is Marxist, and so it's a communist influenced government that is very much listening to the insights of Karl Marx from the 1850s. And so when this government takes control, Richard Nixon becomes very nervous about the idea that you've got communists who have established themselves in Latin America, because we've been having problems with Cuba and their communism ever since that happened in the late 1950s. This is especially important because when you take a look at the Carter presidency of the 1970s, you'll see that in your textbook he's having problems with Cuban mercenaries getting involved in places like Angola and other places around the world, trying to spark communist revolutions. And so Nixon is going to send his troops into Chile so that he can upend Allende's government. There's going to be a coup that takes place, and we're going to install a dictator named Pinochet, who will become the leader of Chile for a long period of time. And he'll be our ally, but he's also a dictator, kind of like we saw with the Shah of Iran. And this is going to create multiple feelings in people who are living in the area, because of the fact that they're going to see this insertion of a government that is a dictatorship, and very abusive, but it's being done with American approval. In our minds, though, it's good because it's stopping the spread of communism. I see the next question is asking about the Bakke case, and I rolled that into affirmative action, so hopefully that's going okay for you. I have not heard the song Watergate by Something Fierce, but as soon as I get done doing this video, I will be Google searching it so that I can listen to it when I drive over and pick up my daughter from volleyball. Have I seen Argo? No, this is one of the regrets that I've got right now is we've been watching a lot of Marvel movies and Star Wars and others with the kids. But I'm a little behind with actually like culturally significant movies that I would like to watch, and so that's on my short list of things that I would like to dig into. I don't see any other questions tonight, and so I'm hoping that you guys are good. Congratulations again on being to this point. After this, we've only got 3 chapters left to wrap up in the 3 weeks before we have our AP test, and so you are on the final kick, and so hopefully everything is going well in your preparations. But let me refresh one more time. I see nothing as far as more questions, so I'm assuming that you guys are in good shape. Feel free to email if you got any other questions. I'll be grading for the remainder of tonight, so I can check that out. But otherwise, I'll sign off, and hopefully everything goes well with your review tonight.